Pinball. It feels like the easiest thing to ever make as a project I can try to recreate in Godot after not touching the engine for almost a year. The idea of making a pinball machine came about while I was looking at one video on YouTube talking about the newest features in Godot. And the first thing I thought was that this is probably something easy to make while still introducing me to Godot's 3D features. And look, I also remember playing a little bit of Space Cadet Pinball whenever I borrowed my cousin's old Windows PC. It was an addicting game that had the equivalent satisfaction of seeing the DVD logo hit the corner of the screen. So I thought, okay, I already know how to 3D model some stuff in Blender. All I need to do is review a bunch of 10-hour-long tutorials, then I'm good to go. Is what I thought would be the case until I encountered some problems while developing my Space Cadet bootleg. Okay, first off, 3D modeling. That was simple enough to make. I took some design cues from Space Cadet itself and this vector image I found in Google, gave it a more casino look to its design, then changed it along the way as my project developed over in Godot. I import the blend file and my textures, set the materials, then link that to my imported textures. Then I'm ready to work in Godot. Yay! But now, the frustrating part. How do I add physics in Godot? Well, Godot has 3 physics bodies that I can use to make everything in my scene. The first and most simplest one is the static body 3D node. These are immovable objects not affected by gravity that do not react to forces whatsoever. They basically function only as collisions to things that are actually going to be moving in your scene. These will be what the walls and floors of our pinball machine will be. The other two is the rigid body 3D and the character body 3D. These two both react to forces and collisions, except one is mainly used to add force to inanimate objects, while one is used for characters you basically control. Now, as someone starting out with no good experience of making games, aside from making a few small 2D web games, you'd think that with a small pinball game, there would be no need to use a character body 3D node because all you need are rigid body 3Ds that one can manipulate position properly to make it move on screen. But nope. After experimenting a little bit, everything that will push the ball, from the spring to the bumpers to the flippers, are all character body 3Ds. The only rigid body 3D will be our pinball. Now you might be wondering, Morgan, why is it that all of a sudden your machine is a living, breathing Frankenstein monster? Well, I'll get to that in a bit, but to keep it simple, physics in Godot kinda sucks, and more importantly, real-life physics also sucks. So we're going to be using some built-in functions only available in the character body 3D node to make our ball move like crazy around the board and therefore activate the same happy chemicals released in our brain whenever the ball starts knocking around the top bumpers in Space Cadet. But before that, how do we push the ball from the launch pad? Well, that's easy enough. Make your project inputs in the project settings, then create the collision shapes for your objects. After which, make an if statement changing the velocity of your springs whenever you press and release your launch button, letting it move around. Then change the collision layer and mask of your spring and pinball. For the pinball, I made its collision layer be at layer 2, and for the spring, I made the layer 3. Walls and floors stay at layer 1. For the collision masks, I only let the pinball detect layers 1 and 3, and the spring does not detect anything. Same for the walls and floors. It will not react to forces made by the ball, and just like that, it works. You can push the ball around, but since my board is oriented horizontally, I have to rotate it slightly so the ball drops to the edge of the board. And once I did that, I realized that the movement of my spring is now broken. What is happening? Well, the direction of the movement of my spring, aka my velocity, is based upon the global axis of my scene, not its local axis. So how do I stop it from doing that? My first instinct is that there must be a way to change the axis that it's trying to reference, but then after a couple of agonizing research, I thought, screw it. Instead of changing my velocity's axis direction, I will orient my board back to its original position and change instead the gravity direction of my entire project. From vector free of 0, -1, 0, it is now vector free of 0, -1, -1, which makes my gravity direction be tilted diagonally, but I kept the y value so it's still guaranteed that my pinball will stick to the floor. But what you'll notice after doing all this is that your launch pad has the push power of a mildly swole gym bro who you kinda admire, But you know that there are better horizons to aspire than that. The reason why your spring is weak is because this is Godot trying to simulate real-life physics. But real life kinda sucks, so unless we start getting the same energy as the ones we see from the characters of Kung Fu Hustle, we riot. To fix this, we need to change the collision mask of our spring so that it can now detect our pinball. This will now make the ball move the spring somewhat, but in exchange, we can now detect the pinball in our character body 3D of our spring via the getSlideCollisionCount function. This is where we now need to make a separate function for pushing my ball in the Launchpad script. For this, I copy-pasted the script shown in this tutorial by Magicayo Games. This tutorial is all about how you can push objects in your game, but I realized that I can reuse the script to make the push force I need to make the ball move. The script is kind of complicated, but I'll try to explain this as best as I can. Essentially, the script activates my pinball's applyImpulse function built into its rigid body class. The applyImpulse function essentially adds a quick frame of velocity into our pinball, aka a push force. We just need to know the direction and speed our ball will go via vector free. To do this, we first need to somehow detect the ball in our script. This is where the getSlideCollisionCount function of our character body 3D is used. Using a for statement, we get the collider of our pinball, aka the pinball object itself, then use the getNormal function of our pinball to know the normal of the area of our pinball colliding with the spring itself. We get its negatives that we are telling Godot that for the direction of our ball, we wanted to push away from the spring, not towards it. Then we change the y value of our push direction of our ball to 0 because we don't need this ball to fly off our board. We multiply this number by some kind of push force, then we are essentially done. Link your product to the applyImpulse function of our ball, then you're done. Oh, and I guess we also have these other variables that the tutorial made for me, but I really don't see how it improved nor hinder my game's physics, so I just left it there for safekeeping. After doing all this and putting your function in the physics process function, we can reuse the script on our flippers and bumpers. The only change is that the flipper script manipulates its rotational values when the button is pressed, while the bumpers do not react to player input whatsoever. Since no velocity is being manipulated, I noticed that the push function doesn't work on the pinball upon collision of these objects, mainly because of this unknown variable I just talked about. So I set this value to 1 or just get rid of it entirely in the script. There's also now a problem wherein if the ball hits the flipper, it just starts bouncing away even if I haven't rotated the flipper. To fix this, I put my push function under an if statement in my flipper script, wherein it will only apply force when the button responsible for flipping the flipper is pressed. And there we go. Everything is fixed, right? Well, wrong. Even after all of this, my wall collisions aren't always going to be satisfying enough to keep this ball from moving away from the board. Even when I switched to the Jolt physics engine, I still encounter problems that I thought will be easy to solve. A way that I can keep my ball from moving is by making my collisions thicker. This is because wall collisions are detected every frame, but if your object is moving really fast, it would not have time to detect the wall and instead will go right through it. Yet this solution does not always work for narrow paths on my board. So I sometimes have to turn on or off collision mask using the set collision mask value of my pinball, and some body entered signals made by some area 3D nodes to make sure my ball does not get stuck at a corner. I suggest that this is where you should probably test things out and see what collision shapes and settings work best for you to avoid object clipping. And there we go. The pinball machine is complete. There's still some things that I wish I could have done better, especially with some collision problems that I've encountered, but so far, this is a working board that works well for my liking as a test to see how much I know about Godot's 3D game engine. If you want to know more about how I made everything, I live stream everything and put the VODs via a playlist in the description. I also link Magicayo Games tutorial and its custom push away rigid bodies function in the description if you want the more detailed guide of the code actually running more than half of my game. That is it for now, so go read a book.